All right. Morning, folks. My name is Nina. My pronouns are she, her. I'm going to be translating today. Rocio's just getting ready. And we will be ready to start in just a second. She'll be turning her camera on in a second.
Bueno, si quieres empezamos, entonces.
Sí.
Hola, hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Rocío Suárez. Soy coordinadora general del Centro de Apoyo a las Identidades Trans, una organización que tiene su trabajo en México, principalmente en la Ciudad de México y el Estado de México.
All right. Rocio says, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rocio Suárez. I am the general coordinator of CAIT, which is the Centro de Apoyo a las Identidades Trans, or the Support Center for Trans Identities. We work in Mexico, principally in the nation's capital, or the Mexico City, and then the surrounding state or peripheries in the state of Mexico.
El día de hoy queremos compartirles un enfoque que estamos realizando en nuestro trabajo. Este enfoque se llama Herramientas para la Vida.
So today we wanted to share with you all a project that we're working on in our organization. It's a series of, the project or the focus is called Tools for Life.
¿Por qué le llamamos Herramientas para la Vida? Nosotras trabajamos con población que ejerce el trabajo sexual en calle, principalmente mujeres trans.
So why is this project called Tools for Life? First, as context, I think it's important to share that our organization is composed of and works primarily with the community of street-based sex workers, principally trans women, but not exclusively.
México es el segundo país con la mayor cantidad de asesinatos de personas trans en el mundo. Y otro dato a resaltar es que la ocupación principal de las mujeres trans asesinadas es el de trabajadoras sexuales.
Also, for context, we know that Mexico, given the data that is reported, is the second, is the top second country in the nation that experiences the highest number of assassinations against trans people. And if we look at the data of trans women in particular, the highest proportion or the population that's most highly represented in assassinations of trans women are sex workers.
Herramientas para la Vida es por ello nuestra respuesta ante la muerte y la violencia que sufren las trabajadoras sexuales en México.
And so because of that, this toolkit, Tools for the Life, is our response to the death and violence that trans sex workers experience in Mexico.
Buscamos incrementar el capital social de las poblaciones para hacer frente al VIH mediante estrategias de alcance comunitario entre pares.
And so we work with sex workers. We do a community outreach around HIV prevention and other issues with street-based sex workers at the same time. And so she's going to start sharing a PowerPoint to go into this project.
Sí, estoy colocando la presentación.
Okay, she's just setting up the presentation.
Muy bien, estoy compartiendo la presentación.
Sí, se ve perfecto, Rocío.
Perfecto. Entonces, estoy colocando en donde íbamos. Generamos espacios presenciales de escucha, orientación y acompañamiento.
So the sort of like principal function of the organization, or what we all do in our day-to-day, is that we work to create in-person spaces where we're able to listen to our trans sisters. We're able to like work on community organizing projects in those like in-person spaces, and yeah.
Bueno, y también actuamos bajo un modelo de prevención combinada. Este modelo de prevención combinada es un enfoque integral de prevención del VIH que articula estrategias conductuales, biomédicas y estructurales. En el tema conductual genera la modificación de conductas de riesgo. Ahí realizamos entrevistas cara a cara, realizamos intervenciones de líderes de opinión popular y también campañas de comunicación. En la parte biomédica, buscamos bloquear la transmisión del VIH e ITS y buscamos reducir riesgos mediante la distribución de condones y lubricantes, mediante la canalización o la aplicación de prueba rápida y también mediante la canalización a la profilaxis post-exposición. Y en la parte estructural buscamos generar ambientes sociales favorables, buscando reformas legales y políticas públicas, reducir el estigma y la discriminación y la desigualdad y la violencia de género hacia las poblaciones de mujeres trabajadoras sexuales.
Great. So really quickly, the word that I forgot in the previous translation is that we also through those in-person spaces, we're also organizing accompaniments. I think Rocio is going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like in the future, so I'll just leave that for the future slide. In this past slide, she talked about the sort of combined HIV prevention methodology that they have. So it's a methodology that combines visions or perspectives that include a biomedical perspective, a behavioral perspective, and a structural perspective around how HIV is transmitted. This vision isn't just informed by sort of theoretical models. We also do in-person interviews with street-based sex workers, both trans and non-trans, around like violence they face, and to identify prevention, sort of to identify prevention risks. From there, we also do communication campaigns, or like informing folks around different prevention strategies and treatment strategies around HIV. And the biomedical part in particular of the work involves an identification of risk factors of transmission through the aforementioned methods, and then also sort of street-based distribution of condoms and lubrication, also administration of rapid HIV tests, and the administration of post-exposure prophylaxis or PEP when needed. These are all services that are provided free to community members during sort of like in rutas nocturnas, in like night brigades, or just folks from the organization and folks who are affiliated walking around streets where sex workers, where our sisters are working at night. And then around the structural piece, we look to create environments that are free from, or have where folks are experiencing less stigma around being a population that's at higher risk for HIV transmission or being HIV positive. We can work around issues of stigma and discrimination, and prevention of gender-based violence against women, and particularly trans women who are street-based sex workers. Oh, and sorry, really quickly, something that I misspoke on. The interviews and the communication strategies are seen as part of the behavioral, is that like third behavioral sector of the prevention strategy. Okay, adelante, Rocío, perdón.
Sí, y en estos años hemos estado trabajando bajo algunos de estos pilares. Uno de ellos son los diagnósticos comunitarios participativos, que se implementan con herramientas participativas y educativas, como son el universo, el personaje típico, el viaje a la salud y a la justicia, que buscan generar evidencia cuantitativa y cualitativa para identificar los principales obstáculos en el acceso a los servicios de salud, seguridad y justicia, y también documentar actos de violación a derechos humanos.
So another thing that we do is we organize workshops, community workshops. We call them participatory community diagnostic sessions. And so the tools that we try to give folks, our participants in these workshops, are thinking about their own universe, right? The resources that they have access to, like typical trends in I guess like trans folks that they work alongside if they're sex workers, or just like the typical trans folks in Mexico City or in Mexico, the state of Mexico, and the sort of journey that folks take to maintain their health, and then find like justice when they experience injustice in their life. And so the great thing about these workshops is that they allow us to come up with quantitative and qualitative evidence for to identify the main obstacles that folks are facing in accessing services of and accessing health services, finding security in their lives, and also getting justice in that light, and getting justice for injustices they face. And that's principally defined through a sort of like criminal justice lens, right? So thinking through how folks are able to, like their interactions with police stations, setting up investigations against violent crimes, or like other kinds of crimes that they experience, and just other interactions they might have with police, and the criminal justice system. And then that allows us to create sort of like at a grassroots level, documentation against violations of human rights of trans sex workers and trans people generally. A lot of times the people who come to these workshops aren't just trans women who are sex workers, but are trans women generally.
En
Perdón,
zonas de
adelante,
trabajo
pues.
sexual en la Ciudad de México y en el Estado de México, en las que distribuimos insumos de prevención, condones, lubricantes, entregamos material informativo sobre derechos humanos, prevención, promovemos la aplicación de pruebas de detección y damos orientación e información sobre diversos trámites y derechos.
So here Rocio is just going into depth a little bit more about the night walks or the night routes that our team goes through. We distribute sort of like packages around prevention. So those include the condoms and lubricants that we talked about before that are given free. And then also when folks need rapid tests and PEP, rapid HIV testing and PEP services are given out for free. We also give folks sort of informative pamphlets around human rights of sex workers, HIV prevention, those communication materials that she talks about earlier. I mentioned already the distribution of HIV rapid tests, and then generally giving folks information and orientation around government sort of like petitions, paperworks that folks can go forward with. So for example, like name and gender marker changes to their birth certificate or other identities, trying to help folks get birth certificates who might not like have their own identifying information on other sort of like government paperwork and things like that.
Durante el año 2020 y 2021, en la parte más álgida del COVID-19, muchas trabajadoras sexuales se vieron afectadas por esta epidemia y por el cierre social que se dio en México y en el mundo. Por ello implementamos la campaña Haciendo Calle, con la participación de la Alianza Mexicana de Trabajadoras Sexuales, el Condón Móvil y un grupo de voluntarios. En esta campaña pudimos distribuir apoyos económicos, despensas, ropa, artículos de higiene, así como también cubrebocas, gel antibacterial, condones, lubricantes y pruebas rápidas entre trabajadoras sexuales de la Ciudad de México y del Estado de México.
Okay. So as a result of the pandemic, we saw a lot of just a lot of like social, what Rosia is describing as social closing in Mexico and throughout the world that had a big impact on sex workers. So from the years 2020 to 2021, Gait, her organization, joined in coalition with two other grassroots organizations or collectives called Condomóvil, which is an organization that distributes condoms, rapid tests of HIV and hepatitis, and other HIV prevention and treatment services, and connects folks with treatment services in Mexico City and the state. And then AMITS, which is a collective of principally cis female sex workers, to create this campaign called Haciendo Calle, which literally means doing street, but we've translated in English as like hitting the street. And so this was principally a mutual aid campaign to meet the like pressing needs on the ground of primarily street-based sex workers, but also online sex workers, thanks to the sort of connections of AMITS, the other sex worker collective, to meet sort of the pressing needs of folks that came up during the pandemic. So that principally looked like giving folks immediate economic support. So giving sex workers like cash stipends when needed, giving them food, clothing, and then sort of artículos de higiene, hygiene articles. So that looked like giving folks masks, antibacterial gel, condoms, lubricants, and then continuing to give sort of other HIV prevention services like rapid tests to street-based, but also online sex workers who were able to come to like our reunion points in the streets.
El año pasado llevamos a cabo la segunda encuesta de trabajo sexual, derechos y no discriminación, en coordinación con el Consejo para Prevenir y Erradicar la Discriminación en la Ciudad de México.
So last year we organized our the second survey that our collective has ever put out around sex work, discrimination, rates of sex workers and non-discrimination. It's a survey that we administer through like a grassroots methodology to sex workers in Mexico City and Mexico State. And we did it in collaboration with a government organization of Mexico City that's called the Commission to Eradicate Discrimination and Violation of Human Rights in Mexico City.
En esta encuesta participaron 217 personas que ejercen el trabajo sexual en la Ciudad de México y nos ayudó para evidenciar el impacto diferenciado del COVID-19 en las trabajadoras sexuales. Nos resaltó el trabajo de la sociedad civil ante la pandemia del COVID-19, mostró la falta de las políticas públicas de apoyo a trabajadoras sexuales durante este periodo, y nos va a ayudar esta encuesta a abrir mesas de diálogo y trabajo con el gobierno de la Ciudad de México.
Okay, so this survey in particular was just administered within Mexico City, and we were able to get 217 sex workers to participate in it. The evidence provided us with concrete evidence to think about, to understand the ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic specifically impacted sex workers. It was ultimately the survey was made possible because of civil society organizations, so grassroots organizations that were able to carry it out. And it showed us the lack of public policies that are helping sex workers. And were able to allow us to bring sort of politically, we're able to the results were able to allow us to open up dialogue with certain government officials in Mexico City about issues of human rights, violations, and the like material conditions that sex workers faced during the pandemic and now.
Algunos de las líneas de trabajo de esta encuesta tienen que ver con el tema de seguridad. Y, por ejemplo, estamos actualmente impulsando el mapeo de hoteles inseguros, que busca generar protocolos de actuación y prevención de actos de violencia y extorsión y discriminación que viven las trabajadoras sexuales de la Ciudad de México, y también busca identificar qué hoteles no garantizan la seguridad de las trabajadoras sexuales. Esta información la compartiremos con el gobierno de la Ciudad de México y con las entidades dedicadas a la seguridad en la Ciudad de México.
So one of the sort of big points that came out of the survey was the question of the security of sex workers, particularly in like while they're on the job or while we're working. And so one of the projects that came out of the data around the violence that sex workers face is this initiative to create a map of unsafe hotels in Mexico City. So we're currently creating a map not just with the information that can be found and is publicly accessible on news sites around violence that sex workers face in certain hotels, but also from like a grassroots perspective of word of mouth in the community. Particularly, we're interested in identifying in which hotels are sex workers, trans or sex experience, but particularly trans, experiencing discrimination, violence, or police extortion. And then from there, once the map has been created, we have the intention of sharing it with the government of Mexico City. This currently is a project that's just limited to Mexico City. And then, and particularly, we're interested in sharing it with the government officials, with government entities that are in charge of questions of security.
También con esta encuesta estamos impulsando la creación de un espacio de salud enfocado a las trabajadoras sexuales de la Ciudad de México, retomando un programa llamado Orquídeas, que dejó de funcionar en el año 2020 y que pretendemos se reinstale por parte del gobierno de la Ciudad de México.
And also, as we identify hotels that aren't guaranteeing the human rights of sex workers, with this data, we're also hoping to advocate for the creation of a community clinic or another sort of like health space that's particularly oriented towards or particularly serves the trans community. There used to be in Mexico City a government program called Orquídeas that was funded by the government, that worked to promote sort of health issues, I guess the health of sex workers, but it was terminated in 2020 during the pandemic. And so we're hoping to get like renewed funding for that program to get it restarted and create like a physical space where sex workers can have health concerns addressed.
Y también estaremos empujando el reconocimiento del trabajo sexual en la Ciudad de México. Este reconocimiento que se presentó una iniciativa en el Congreso local en el año 2020 y que quedó detenida. Nos parece importante este reconocimiento del trabajo sexual en la Ciudad de México para garantizar los derechos de las y los trabajadores sexuales aquí en la Ciudad de México.
And so another project that we've been working on and that we will continue to work on as a result of these, the like survey data, is the recognition of sex work as work in Mexico City. In 2022, a bill was actually was written by a by a congressman in the Congress of Mexico City, which is its own federal entity or state within the country. But the bill just sort of stayed there, and with the pandemic, it wasn't prioritized, and since then has been silent. So we're interested in retaking that bill, collaborating again with that congressman to make sure that sex work is recognized as work legally in Mexico City as a strategy or tactic to guarantee the human rights of sex workers.
Queremos comentar que en México existen diferentes legislaciones y normas que afectan el trabajo sexual. Estas son a nivel federal, a nivel estatal y a nivel local.
So as we're talking about like laws that affect sex workers, it's important to understand that there are multiple forms of legislation that impact sex workers, whether it's legislation or laws or legislative norms, and those exist at a federal, state, and local level.
En el caso de esta iniciativa de ley es a nivel estatal, a nivel de la Ciudad de México, y estamos generando también el reconocimiento del trabajo sexual y la descriminalización del trabajo en los bandos municipales del Estado de México.
And so the particular initiative that we talked about, the bill that was written in 2020, that's sort of stayed in the Congress and hasn't experienced any movement. So that's particularly a labor law change to recognize sex work as non-salaried or informal labor within the state of Mexico City. So that exists on a state level. But at the same time, we're also working in Mexico, in the state of Mexico, which is outside of which is the periphery of Mexico City, around the question of the decriminalization of sex work, since it is criminalized there in ways that it isn't in Mexico City and certain municipalities. So that legislative advocacy work in Mexico State exists on the sort of municipal level.
Mientras en la Ciudad de México no se criminaliza el trabajo sexual, aunque no es reconocido como un trabajo, en el resto del país, los estados y los municipios cuentan con bandos municipales. Estos bandos municipales llegan a criminalizar el trabajo sexual a partir de considerarlo una falta cívica o bien de tipificarlo como faltas contra la moral y las buenas costumbres.
And so in Mexico City in particular, I think it's important to clarify that sex work is neither considered a crime of any kind. It's neither a delito is, sorry, the Spanish is coming out. It's neither a felony nor a misdemeanor, at least in US terms. But it's also not recognized as work within Mexico City. It's sort of in this legal limbo of neither of the two. But throughout the rest of the country and other states and in other municipalities, there are usually legal proclamations that identify sex work as either a misdemeanor, it's considered a falta contra la moral, which is an offense against against morals in a legal code, and good customs. So it's typically, sex work outside of Mexico City is typically typified as a misdemeanor and not a felony.
El año pasado, con el cambio de gobiernos municipales en el Estado de México, realizamos una campaña para que se deroguen de los bandos municipales estas faltas cívicas que criminalizan al trabajo sexual.
And so last year there was a change in government in the state of Mexico. And so since then we've been able to work a little bit more or do more legislative advocacy with government officials around the question of sex work being criminalized through this misdemeanor charge as an offense against good morals and good customs.
Para ello, trabajamos en una muestra de 15 municipios del Estado de México, donde enfocamos esta campaña y logramos o identificamos que en por lo menos 12 municipios se dejó de criminalizar el trabajo sexual.
So again, since that change in government last year in Mexico State, which is the periphery outside of Mexico City, we've been working with 15 municipalities around this legislative question. And since then, 12 of which have stopped criminalizing sex work as a misdemeanor.
Nos parece un avance importante en la lucha por el reconocimiento del trabajo sexual y la descriminalización de el mismo en el país.
And we consider that a pretty major victory and a really important victory in the fight to decriminalize sex work, and also have it recognized as a form of labor within Mexico as a country.
Aquí dejamos nuestros datos de contacto y donde puede consultarse la encuesta de trabajo sexual en la Ciudad de México que les comentamos hace un momento.
And so here, I've left you all with our contact information. If anyone's interested in getting in touch with us, at the bottom of the slide under datos de contacto or contact information. And then at the top of the slide is a link that where you all can find the, if anyone's interested, it's in Spanish, the data that came out of the survey that I talked about recently around sex work that was administered in 2021. Or whose results were published in 2021.
Muchas gracias y cierro esta presentación.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'm closing the presentation. And I guess we're opening up to Q&A.
Bueno, ahora estamos abiertos para recibir preguntas, comentarios del público que nos acompaña este día. Muchas gracias por su presencia.
So thank you everyone for your presence. Right now we're open to any questions that the audience might have for us today. Okay. Me parece que ya está recolando las preguntas y ahorita nos va a dejarlas en el chat.
Vale.
Thank you so much for the presentation and all the information. It's really important that we have the insights that you provided. So I want to say thank you for that. And we're so happy you have the occasion to join us by Zoom or even if you're not able to be here in person.
Bueno, este miembro del público dice, primero más que nada, queremos darle las gracias, Rocío, por estar presente el día de hoy, aunque no pudiera estar presente de una manera presencial. Nos parece muy importante la información que nos comparte y agradecemos mucho que nos haya compartido la perspectiva de su organización y de las comunidades con quien trabaja.
Sí, gracias, gracias.
She says thank you.
Bueno, ahí aparece creo que una pregunta.
Ah, sí, perdón. Sí, en el chat dice la pregunta, si tienen algún mensaje para las personas ahí en el Congreso de SIDA 2022. O sea, para el público que está allá.
Nos parece importante señalar que el COVID-19 puso en evidencia la falta de oportunidades y vulnerabilidad que viven las personas que ejercen el trabajo sexual. Esta conferencia abre la puerta para que hagamos eco al lema de que nadie se quede atrás en el acceso a los servicios de salud, nadie se quede atrás en la prevención, en la atención médica oportuna, nadie se quede atrás en los derechos. El trabajo sexual es trabajo.
So yeah, thank you so much for the question. She says that the COVID-19 pandemic has made it even more evident, or has made it evident to us, the lack of opportunities and resources that many sex workers face. And so with that, we want to echo a call that we as a movement have been making for generations, that no one will be left behind in the fight to access health, in the fight for prevention of HIV and other health elements, and in the fight for human rights, and that sex work is work.
Share a bit more about the experience of folks in Mexico. I'm wondering. Just wondering if you should explain that. The criminalization of sex work is in a bit of a gray area where it's not technically criminalized to focus. I'm wondering how sex workers in Mexico experience interactions with police, and how like police surveillance in this gray area might limit folks' access to resources, the way they interact with clients, and if that experiences of police harassment in this gray area is still an issue for the folks you work with.
Hey, thank you so much for the question. The sound was going in and out. I think I heard most of it, but would someone mind recapping the question in the chat, just so I make sure that I'm conveying it like
on
in its
it.
full? Thank you so much. And did the question also ask about other states outside of Mexico City where there isn't this legal gray area, or was it just asking about Mexico City in particular?
I guess different.
Oh, sorry.
Under different models, what are like the different interactions?
Okay. I think I heard. Entonces, Rocío, la pregunta tiene que ver con los regímenes legales que criminalizan y no reconocen el trabajo sexual dentro de la Ciudad de México, pero también dentro de otros estados de la República. Más pues específicamente la pregunta era si nos puede hablar un poco acerca pues, de este tema y cómo es la experiencia por parte de las compañeras trabajadoras sexuales, de experiencias de vigilancia por parte de la policía, acoso policial, extorsión, etcétera, de las personas dentro de la Ciudad de México que están como en este limbo legal en que no está criminalizado tal cual el trabajo sexual, pero tampoco está reconocido como trabajo. No sé si me explico bien.
Sí.
Ok, súper.
En el año 2019-2020 se pretende reformar la Ley de Cultura Cívica, y en esta reforma se busca criminalizar y dotar de mayores facultades a las alcaldías para detener y perseguir a las trabajadoras sexuales en la Ciudad de México.
Y en particular les interesa saber cómo es la experiencia de estas compañeras, de las compañeras con el acoso policial, con pues, la extorsión, la vigilancia y así, a partir de este cambio, ya que no está criminalizado en la Ciudad de México. ¿Cómo ha cambiado?
Actualmente, bueno, primero señalar que todas las encuestas que se hacen sobre el tema de discriminación hacia población trans y trans de trabajo sexual señalan como el primer agente violador de derechos humanos a la policía. Actualmente, aunque no se persigue formalmente al trabajo sexual, la policía extorsiona e intimida a las trabajadoras sexuales en calle e incluso buscan extorsionar a los clientes de las trabajadoras sexuales.
Okay, super. Muchas gracias, Rocio. So just as context for that, the decriminalization of sex work occurred fairly recently in 2019 and 2020, like around 2019 or 2020, when the government of the state of Mexico City put forward a change to the law of civic culture, which is where that like misdemeanor charge of sex work as a violation of morals and good customs was. So in 2020, that law was changed, it was taken out, and that obligated the alcaldías or the boroughs of Mexico City to stop criminalizing sex work formally. And so we've seen from data like before that happened, from polls of sex workers, that the greatest human rights violations, or the greatest human rights violator of sex workers has always been the police, right? And so because this is a sort of new phenomenon, and it just happened right before the pandemic started, it's still something new that we're seeing, but we're still seeing that even after it's been formally legalized, police are still committing extortion and intimidation of sex workers, particularly street-based sex workers are the most vulnerable to this extortion and intimidation, and also to their clients, right? So for folks who aren't maybe aware of that change in law, police are still trying to pretend that it exists to for sort of purposes of corruption, intimidation, and extortion. If you're interested in learning more about this, just as an aside, there's a woman, a researcher at Harvard Law School named Claudia Torres. I can put her name in the chat. She's an academic who's not a sex worker, but she's worked in collaboration with the collective, and her master's thesis was particularly on the point of like how the recognition of sex work as non-salaried labor in Mexico City changed the situation for sex workers and how it didn't, around issues of like access to housing, but also police violence, intimidation, surveillance, things like that. So I'll put her name in the chat again, but if you just Google her, Harvard Law School, you'll probably find that information as well. And she says, thank you for the question. Oh, she says, thank you for the question, but she has more parts to this answer.
Otra situación frecuente es la nula actuación policial o el incumplimiento de protocolos ante situaciones de violencia que sufren las trabajadoras sexuales. Esto quiere decir que la policía, ante un llamado de auxilio de trabajadoras sexuales, llegan tarde o buscan intimidar a las trabajadoras sexuales para que no interpongan denuncias ante las personas que las violentan.
Another thing that we've seen that's happened after this, what's it called? After this change in law, the decriminalization of sex work as a misdemeanor in 2019, 2020, is that we've been working with sort of like sex worker collectives, ours and others have been able to work with police to create what we're calling justice protocols. So what often happens is when street-based sex workers in particular, or other sex workers, give out like calls for help, like call the police after an instance of violence, for example, police intentionally arrive late to the scene. And then there are other tactics like intimidation, lying, manipulation, etc., that happen to sex workers to try to prevent them or discourage them from reporting crimes that they've experienced. So that's also something that we have been trying to work on more now that sex work isn't like formally criminalized, and police cannot treat them as street-based sex workers as people that are breaking the law simply because they are exercising their work. Y dice que esto fue la última pregunta.
Muy bien, pues gracias. Gracias a ti por la traducción.
Sí, de que, pues gracias por su paciencia conmigo, ¿eh? Entonces Ana apenas nos dio las gracias en el chat. And Rocio just wanted to say thank you again, everyone, for your presence and for attending this presentation. And yeah, thank you all. I just wanted to thank you all for your patience with my translations.
So much. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Ya, y no sé si escucha bien, pero dijeron muchas gracias y ya hubo un fuerte aplauso después.
Vale, vale, gracias. Y estamos aquí en contacto y siguiendo también a la distancia esta conferencia internacional.
Super, gracias, Rocío. And she said, thank you so much again. We're here in touch with everyone. We're in touch if for whatever reason, and we're going to be continuing to be present in this conference at a distance, and are really appreciative of the international invitation.